Good morning and welcome to today's webinar to explore findings from the new report, Lessons Learned from the 2012 Grade 4 Writing Computer-Based Assessment Study. I'm Cornelia, or Executive Director of the National Assessment Governing Board and moderator for today's discussion. The National Assessment Governing Board is a nonpartisan organization created by Congress to set policy for the National Assessment of Educational Progress, or NAEP as you probably know it, or you may know it as the nation's report card. As many of you know, NAEP is the largest ongoing nationally representative assessment of student achievement in the United States. Today we have with us a panel of experts who will share their thoughts on the study and its implications and respond to questions from our audience. Our first panelist is Shannon Garrison, a fourth grade teacher at Solana Avenue Elementary School in Los Angeles. Shannon is also a member of the governing board and chair of its Assessment Development Committee. Shannon is also a National Board Certified Teacher and has authored winning applications for the National Blue Ribbon Schools and California Distinguished Schools program. She's also received a National Milken Educator Award in 2008. Another panelist we have with us today is Elise Eidman-Aadahl. She is Executive Director of the National Writing Project, where she draws on 15 years of experience leading action learning efforts for this project and for other education organizations. She is the recipient of the Hollis Caswell Award for Curriculum Studies. Her recent work engages educators in schools, libraries, and museums as they rethink their teaching and learning environments with a view toward digital composition and production, connected learning, equity, and civic engagement. Elise is also a former high school English and journalism teacher, university professor, and evaluation consultant. Our third panelist today is Karen Cater, President and CEO of Digital Promise. Karen's prior experience includes heading the Office of Educational Technology at the U.S. Department of Education, where she led the development of the 2010 National Education Technology Plan, and also directing Apple's leadership and advocacy efforts in education. She is past chair of the Partnership for 21st Century Schools and has served on the board of the Software and Information Industry Association. Karen began her education career as a teacher in Alaska. Ebony Walton, a research scientist at the National Center for Education Statistics, or NCES, will lead us in a demonstration of the interactive website displaying the report's final findings. Throughout today's webinar, we encourage you to engage in an ongoing Twitter chat about the results using #NAEP. Before we begin, Jennifer Bocchieri, our webinar producer, will review logistics about the webinar platform for you. Jennifer?
Thank you very much, Cornelia. As Cornelia mentioned, our panelists will respond to questions from the audience during the webinar. So to submit a question, simply type it in the chat box, which is in the lower left corner of your screen, and be sure to click on send so that we get it. And please include your full name and the name of your organization with your questions. And remember that you can submit your questions at any time during the webinar. If you experience any technical difficulties, please send us a note using the chat box, or you may also email us at nagb@compartners.com, and we will get with you as soon as possible. Finally, to view the live closed captioning, you can click on the closed captioning link, which is in the links box, also there on the left-hand side of your screen. While Ebony is doing the demonstration of the interactive website, you can enlarge the screen by clicking on the enlarge button that will be directly on top of the slide deck. This option will only appear when she has begun the demonstration. Cornelia, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Jennifer. The Governing Board is excited to convene this important discussion about the just-released report on computer-based writing. This study, conducted by our partners at NCES, represents an important landmark in understanding whether elementary students can use computers to write. We wanted to share the lessons learned from this study to inform others about the efforts to assess elementary students' writing and composition skills. The study demonstrates that fourth grade students can meaningfully participate in computer-based writing assessments. The governing board's goal is to shift all NAEP assessments to be computer-based beginning in 2017. These results provide evidence that, yes, it is appropriate to include fourth graders in a computer-based NAEP writing assessment. We found that fourth graders were, using a computer and common word processing tools, able to organize and convey their thoughts well enough to be assessed against the NAEP rubric. The study's findings come from two separate efforts: a usability study, which allowed NCS to improve the computer program for fourth graders, and a pilot writing assessment of students using this improved computer program. The usability test asked fourth graders to use the same NAEP computer program that was used to measure 8th and 12th graders' writing skills. Findings showed that fourth grade students had difficulty with the elements of the program's design, and so the program was redesigned to introduce shorter sequence directions, more icons in place of drop-down menus, and other improvements. The study also asked students about their access to computers at home and at school. It found that about 100%, that's amazing, of students reported having access to a computer at school. I think that's really good news. It also reported that 93% reported having access at home. And amazingly, 92% reported they had previously taken a computer-based assessment. All of those were very encouraging statistics for us to learn about. A sample of 13,000 fourth grade students nationwide participated in this study that we're reporting about today. All students were provided with a laptop and headphones. Results showed that students typed enough words to allow evaluators to measure their writing skill. They used computer tools to complete the exercise, and that they could edit text using the word processing tools, including spell check and backspace functions. In this study, each student was given 2 scenarios and had either 20 or 30 minutes to write about each one. All scenarios included text. Some also included pictures or audio or video components. The scenarios were designed to encourage students to develop and organize ideas and demonstrate a specific writing skill, that is, to persuade, to explain, or to convey experience. Overall, students responded more completely when they were given 30 minutes rather than 20 minutes to answer a question. We believe the results of this study offer valuable lessons to educators who want to support elementary students in using computers to write. For example, include easy-to-read instructions and clearly labeled icons, and allow students enough time to develop their responses. Our panel today will discuss some of these implications in greater detail in a few minutes. Before we ask for the panel discussion, however, I'm going to ask Ebony Walton, a research scientist at NCES, to provide a demonstration of the interactive web-based report. So, Ebony, we'll switch to you now.
Thank you, Cornelia. I'm here today to introduce the lessons learned from the 2012 Grade 4 Writing Computer-Based Assessment Study website, which was launched yesterday. For the first time, NAEP assessed 8th and 12th grade students' writing abilities using a computer-based platform in 2011. While NAEP was able to use computer-based assessments at grades 8 and 12 to capture student writing achievement, there were inquiries about how well 4th grade students' writing abilities could be measured using the computer-based approach. In 2011, NAEP conducted a small-scale usability study to evaluate how well 4th graders could navigate the platform employed in the 8th and 12th grade assessments. Based on the findings from the usability study, NAEP administered a revised writing computer-based pilot assessment to 4th graders in 2012. The website that I'm about to show provides an overview of lessons the NAEP program learned during the development and administration of the Grade 4 Writing Computer-Based Pilot Assessment. Here's the home page of this study. It provides context and caveats about this study. Information from the study is divided into 4 areas: platform development, student performance, assessment questions, and accommodations administered. For more information about the writing assessment overall, you can click on Read More to view the 2011 Writing Framework and Specifications, which were established by the National Assessment Governing Board. If you would like a brief summary of the entire website, you may click on Print Summary. So first, I would like to walk you through the platform development section. In this section, we share a few lessons learned from the 2011 Small-Scale Usability Study. During the usability study, interviewers recorded how well 4th graders were able to navigate different assessment platform features. Additionally, some information was collected about the participants' use of computers for writing. Here is one lesson that we've learned about simplifying directions. Originally, students either skipped reading this set of instructions or took over 2 minutes to read them thoroughly. In the redesigned platform, the instructions were presented one at a time, a voiceover of the instructions were added, and a checkbox was included to indicate that the students reviewed the directions before proceeding. With this enhanced design, students took on average 63 seconds to read the instructions. We also shared lessons learned regarding drop-down menus, the navigation panel, the text-to-speech button, and the reset button. I will now move on to the student performance section. In this section, we provide preliminary results from the 2012 pilot study. Around 13,000 4th grade students participated in this study, 80% of which received 2 30-minute writing prompts. The remaining 20% of students received 3 20-minute writing prompts. Please note that the results in this section pertain only to students who participated in this pilot study. They do not reflect student knowledge nationally. In this section of the website, we show the percentage of student responses under the 30-minute writing condition that received a score of 1 through 6, as outlined in the writing framework. Around 14% of the student responses received a score of 1, which represents little or no skill, while about 4% of the student responses received a score of 6, which represents effective writing ability. This section also shares information about how many words and keystrokes students typed to compose their writing responses. Here is a chart that shows the range of words students wrote under the 30-minute prompt condition. By clicking on the legend, we can focus just on the average word count. The average word count for responses that received a score of 1 was 56. The average word count of responses that received a 6 was 231. We also provide information about how often students use certain editing tools. In this case, we see the percentage of 4th grade students in the pilot study that used the backspace key various times. By clicking on the legend, we can focus on the percentage of students that used the backspace key over 200 times in the 30-minute prompt condition. Overall, 12% of the participants used the backspace key over 200 times. If you look at the far right, you see the percentage of the highest performing students. 20% of these students used the backspace key over 200 times. There's more information that can be found on this website if you click through the Assessment Questions and Accommodations section. Additionally, information about how accommodations were provided to students using the computer-based assessment platform can be found, as well as information about the types of writing prompts students were given. So that concludes my demonstration of the website, and I will be happy to answer questions about the pilot study later. Thank you.
Actually, Ebony, I have a couple of questions that I'd like you to address before we move on. Dorothy Strickland from the New Jersey State Board of Education asked, how are the assessments scored, by hand or computer?
Yes. So NAEP uses an electronic image processing system known as EPEN. All of the responses are scored by trained human scorers, and all responses are scored by more than one score to ensure inter-rater reliability. So the scoring is done by human. It's not automated.
So I think this questioner is equating by hand to be by human, but they're actually looking at images on a screen, right?
That's correct.
Okay, thanks. John Pugh from Measurement Incorporated has asked, how was universal accessibility supported for the study? So asking a little bit more about the accessibility components.
Sure. So the writing computer-based assessment is designed to comply with federal policy, which instructs that electronic information technology be accessible to all people, including students with disabilities. For this writing assessment, we used many universal design principles, and in doing so, we reduced the need for accommodations. For example, there was a text-to-speech function on the computer that allowed students to hear selected portions of the directions and tasks through this feature, as opposed to having it being read by an administrator. There are also the ability for the student to adjust the font size up to 48 points. The students were able to select different color schemes, including a high contrast option, and there was an electronic spell check and thesaurus option available to students.
Well, thank you. So this says a third question is about the assessment accommodations and how they are allowed for students with disabilities, and I think you just addressed that in the previous question.
Yes, I did. It's worth noting that while some of the accommodations were handled through this computer-based platform, there were other accommodations that were administered, such as extended time, breaks during testing, the use of a screen magnifier, sign language as needed. So there are other accommodations that were given, as with any NAEP assessment.
Okay, I'll just mention that that question came from the Georgia Department of Education Assessment Division from Deborah Houston. I think that's all the questions for you now. We maybe have some later. And I'm happy to report that we already have 81 participants in our meeting today, and we're ready to start talking with the panelists and hear their thoughts and have them answer some questions about the study as well. So I want to start with Shannon. Shannon, you already heard, is a classroom teacher. So Shannon, can you draw on your experience from the classroom to tell us about how you've worked with fourth grade students in using computers to write, and then some of your reactions to the study and ways that you think you can translate these studies into classroom practice?
Great. Thank you, Cornelia. Just a little context. As mentioned, I teach fourth grade at Solano Avenue Elementary School in downtown Los Angeles. Most of our students are Latino and Asian. Many are English language learners. And I teach in a low-income neighborhood where about 65% of students participate in the federal free and reduced price lunch program. This August, I'll start my 18th year as a classroom teacher, so I've seen a lot of changes over the years in educational policies, standards, curriculum, and especially in technology. But despite all these changes, several things have remained consistent in my classroom. In my classroom, every student is valued, respected, and loved. Every student is provided with a rigorous standards-based curriculum. Every student reads, comprehends, and interacts with texts of varying genres and complexities. Every student engages in problem solving that requires the application of mathematical and higher order thinking skills, and every student must learn to effectively communicate through writing. So like many of you, I've been anxiously awaiting the results of the fourth grade writing computer-based assessment study, which was conducted to determine if fourth grade students could effectively demonstrate their writing knowledge and skills during a computer-delivered assessment. And the study shows that fourth graders can indeed be assessed on computers. I feel that the lessons learned from the study can inform future development of computer-based assessments, assist teachers in designing computer-based assignments, and shed light on what fourth graders know and can do. The study also highlights the benefits of computer-based assessments, especially for elementary age students. They allow for the use of engaging interactive stimuli that's more difficult, if not impossible, to use in traditional paper and pencil assessments. The use of pictures, audio, and video captures students' attention while providing context for the writing task. And in my experience, this is crucial. When students are interested in what they're writing about, they're better able to sustain their level of effort, and in turn, they perform better. For example, in one writing task, the students were told that their school was selecting a new school mascot. They were asked to look at 4 proposed mascots, select one, and then write a persuasive letter to their principal, convincing him or her of their choice. This task has a clear purpose, it's definitely relevant to the lives of 4th graders, and the images add a level of interest. My students would definitely like this task. As Ebony mentioned, computer-based assessments also allow for universal design features, making the assessment accessible to a wider population of students. As an educator, several aspects of the study were particularly interesting to me. The first was that student performance varied in responses written for different purposes. So students were significantly better at conveying experience than they were at explaining or persuading. So as a teacher, it makes me reflect on my own classroom and think about the degree to which I'm engaging my students in writing for varying purposes. When I see results like these, I wonder if students may not be as familiar or have as much experience with writing to explain or persuade. And I think as teachers, we need to make sure that students have ample, meaningful opportunities to write for varying purposes. I also found the student use of the online writing tools fascinating. In my classroom, students tend to erase their writing using the backspace key, even when there are a variety of tools available that would make their revision and editing process easier and more efficient. And this was also true on the NAEP writing pilot. The NAEP study found that although every student was shown an introductory video which thoroughly explained the platform and the tools available, very few took advantage of them. Take, for example, the spell check. Spell check is pretty easy to use and would seem to be of great benefit to 4th graders in their writing. While there was no obvious trend across all students, there were significant differences in the use of the tool. So approximately 35% of the lowest scoring students didn't use spell check at all, while about 47% of the highest performing students used the spell check at least 4 times. While we can't say that the use of spell check led to increase student scores, I'm definitely going to make sure that I teach my students how and when to use all the available writing tools. I think what I love most about the 4th grade writing computer-based assessment study is the focus on lessons learned. So Winston Churchill once said that writing is an adventure, and this is how I feel about learning in general, whether it's children learning to communicate effectively through writing, or teachers incorporating new strategies into their daily lesson, or educators and assessment developers learning about what works for 4th graders on a computer-based assessment. It's all an adventure.
Thanks, Shannon. We have a question that's been posed by Betty Cedar from El Camino College. I'd like for you or any other panelists who would like to respond to this question. What type of enrichment computer class should we be offering kids to properly assist them with taking computerized tests?
Great question. In elementary education, we don't necessarily offer separate computer classes unless we're teaching the use of a specific type of program, per se. We really try and integrate the use of computers and technology as much as possible into the classroom so that it becomes just another tool that they're familiar with using. I think, teaching specifically how to use the tools is very important. Obviously, they need to know how to keyboard, although many of them are very quick with their thumbs these days. But I don't want, when my students sit down to write, I don't want them to worry so much about their keyboarding skills. I want them to focus on their writing. And if computers are integrated throughout all subject areas all day long, it becomes secondhand for them.
Anyone else want to respond to the question? All right, then we will move on to Elise. Elise, we'd like to hear from you and ask you about your role in writing and the importance of writing standards and instruction in all grades, but especially elementary, and what you think writing educators can take away from this study.
Sure. Thank you, Cornelia. I think actually that last part of the question, what writing educators can take away from this study, was really just beautifully illustrated for us by Shannon's remarks, who pointed to a number of ways that she can see a direct correlation between what's here in the study to be learned as an educator and some implications she draw herself for her own classroom practice. And I think that teachers and administrators thinking about this study and looking at their own young people will draw a tremendous number of implications for teaching and learning. So I think that was nicely illustrated. And one of the connections I would make for that is to remind everybody that every NAEP assessment is related to a larger framework about what it is that the assessment should look at and study. And for me, I was actually privileged to be part of the committee, the framework committee, that developed the framework for this particular assessment. And it's a fairly new framework. It governs the writing framework, the writing assessment from 2011 to about 2019. And in many ways, it's a groundbreaking framework. So that framework, which is linked on the site, I'd encourage many people to take a look at it, and particularly the overview of what this framework says writing is, because that's pretty significant in how it is that educators can take insights from this study. One of the things that the framework did was really reaffirm the significance of writing, and that maybe sounds almost silly to say. We're so used to thinking about things like reading, writing, and arithmetic, and writing right up there. But actually, in this particular moment, especially in a digital and internet-powered age, writing is even more significant, I would say. More people have an opportunity to write, to share their writing to broader audiences, to use the tool of composition in a digital environment, to do things that actually a generation or two ago just weren't actually available to the average citizen. The ability to publish and share writing actually globally on the web. So the significance of writing right now is something that we have to hold on to, and because of that, the notion of what it means to prepare young people as writers is ever more significant. The framework, in addition to reaffirming the significance of writing and talking about writing as a purposeful act of composition and production meant to communicate something to someone, not just to demonstrate capacity, with text processing, let's say, but to really say something and to put it out to an audience. It reaffirmed that core piece of writing. But it also talked about the fact that for most people right now, they will be writing in a digital environment, in a computer-based environment. And certainly for fourth graders, they're growing into a world where ever more of our reading and writing interactions are in digital environments. And I guess I want to stress that because it's not simply that the computer was and is an efficient and high-powered way to deliver an assessment. But in writing, actually, writing in a computer-based environment is part of the construct of what writing is. So looking at how young people feel and are able to move into with comfort writing in a digital framework both tells us something about, yes, the move toward putting ever more assessment opportunities in the computer, some of the affordances of a computer-based assessment, but it also tells us something extremely significant about preparing young people to be writers at all, because to be a writer today is to write in digital environments. So I think this is a really important thing in this study. And in this framework, everybody on the committee earlier, moving up to this 2011 framework, knew that that was significant, knew that 8th and 12th grade students should be, in fact, able to write and tested in a computer environment. But the question about our youngest writers, about the 4th graders, whether they can move easily into writing and generating text with confidence in a computer-based environment, that was a question to many, for many, and this study really speaks to that. So I think that's one significant thing I would say about what educators can take from this study. They can take with confidence that our very youngest writers can move into the kinds of writing environments where actually they will be writing for the rest of their lives. They can move in there fairly easily, and we shouldn't be afraid of that. And I think we should be thinking very much as Shannon said, that the computer environment is not an add-on. It's not a place we go just to take assessments or to learn some extra tools. It is a basic tool for writing. That's one. But I guess in the time that I have, make two other quick points, I think, that relate to this framework. One is that apart from delivering and collecting the writing and delivering the assessment on computer, there were a couple of other elements of this framework that were in some ways groundbreaking and speak to what educators are thinking about right now. And one is that the development of this framework drew very heavily on the collaboration and committee members representing college and career. And we talk now a lot about college and career-ready standards, whether those are Common Core standards or alternative standards that speak to college and career readiness. And in developing this framework, significant participation from people at the college level and in a variety of career areas helped shape the very idea of what prompts should be offered, what types of writing should be assessed, what we should be looking for in our young people. And that move, and again, that Shannon referred to, that move to include more opportunities to have young people write for the purposes of explaining and informing, which of course is very significant in college and career and through life, and to persuade, and eventually to take the steps that move toward argumentation. That move was already made in this framework, and that's one of the reasons why we can see lots of data about what young people know and are able to do around those kinds of writing. So in a way, for people who are thinking about classroom instruction or their curricula or wondering about the opportunities for young people in their place, the data, the performance data from this study tells us something about what fourth graders know and able to do that points in some of the same directions as college and career ready standards do now. We can take a lot of lessons from that, particularly perhaps as Shannon was speaking to in her own classroom, looking to see whether young people have an opportunity to develop skills and comfort with writing to explain and writing to persuade. And then I think the last implication I would take, we know in writing itself and in the teaching of writing that young people need time to write. It's not surprising that young people do better when they have 30 minutes than when they have 20, for example. Writing's pretty complex and sophisticated work. You're going to try, if you're really writing, to develop some content which is your own and develop it and perhaps revise it for an audience and make a lot of choices along the way. It's a very sophisticated thing. And to do that sophisticated thing takes time. And it takes time to learn to write, and we need to actually give young people time to write. But we also know from lots of data that in the last decade or so that it's been hard to find those minutes for writing and the teaching of writing in many, many schools and in curricula that's been oriented toward other areas that receive more attention and testing. So in that move toward college and career readiness and in that move toward deeper learning that we might want for our young people, thinking about making time for young people to write and to produce ideas, to revise, to learn to do more than a quick response to a question, but to really use all the affordances of that computer platform, as we saw, to be able to actually revise and meet an audience need. That's going to take some time, and we're going to have to think about how to provide that time in the curriculum, elementary school and beyond.
So thank you for your comments, Louise. Actually, one of our participants asked a question very much related to time. Doug Levin of the State Educational Technology Directors Association was wondering about the frequency. He asked, what effect does the frequency of exposure to writing instruction using the computer have on achievement? So if you know of any studies or things that illuminate that frequency, I think Doug would appreciate hearing about it and the rest of our participants as well.
It's a great question, and I think that many experts in writing would say that actually the more young people, first off, that young people should and could and often are writing every day in some way. They may not be writing extended responses, but we can think about how it is we can allow young people or create conditions for young people to do more than quick responses in writing, but actually extended responses in writing. And then the more they can actually do them and generate them in a digital environment from the get-go, actually the better. One of the things to think about, I think, for many schools is whether there is a structure around technology that means that your computer use, for example, might be in going to a lab briefly, let's say, every week. Well, if I have a group of young people who are mainly going to be writing by hand in the room and then are going to get an opportunity to go for, let's say, an hour to a computer lab to do their final drafts, something like that, they're actually not experiencing the opportunity to generate text and plan and develop ideas within a computer environment. They're mainly using the computer for, let's say, that final editing and publication. So that's a kind of exposure, but in comparison with young people who are developing comfort and confidence in the kind of generating of ideas and managing of text from the get-go in a computer, you can imagine down the road when they show up in different learning environments. I see it here at UC Berkeley, the difference between young people who can show up in a, let's say, a college classroom, open the computer, and with confidence generate their work there from the very beginning. That's a very different situation than the occasional use of a computer at the end of the writing process. So the more we can get technology integrated, those tools into young people's hands for a whole range of purposes, kind of in as ubiquitous a way as possible, I think the better.
Thank you very much, Elise. So Karen, let's turn to your reactions to the study. You've been working in digital education for a good many years, so do you feel there are ways in which this research can contribute to the broader effort to use digital tools to improve learning?
Certainly, and I couldn't agree with Elise's response to that last question more, so thank you. Thank you, Cornelia, and good morning to everybody. So a quote often heard at education gatherings is, "We must educate students for their future, not our past." And it's interesting that what we're talking about today is actually not the future of our students, but the today of our students. They and we are surrounded by technology, and we use it every single day for learning. So technology is powering up the opportunity to learn for students across the country, students of all ages. It's augmenting teacher performance, providing support that teachers need for meeting the individual learning needs of each of their students. Students with devices in their hands have access to the entire Internet. And the Internet, as we know, is full of learning resources, from images of the far reaches of the solar system to underwater ecosystems. There are resources on spiders and wind and tides and the Pythagorean theorem, big history, computer coding, and all of these things inspire and inform learners of all ages. We also have data sets from satellite positioning systems to weather data that enable new kinds of visualizations and the development of powerful tools. But besides the Internet, students with devices in their hands also have access to professional tools, the tools the pros use, from photography to movie making to writing and publishing, as Elise pointed out. Professional writing tools support the process of writing, the process of communicating effectively with text. Computer-based writing tools include those for mind mapping, brainstorming, drafting, outlining, editing, spell checking, finding new words with a thesaurus, establishing word count, and more. Computers also support the practice of listening to your writing, because you can highlight the text on the screen and have the computer read it back to you. Much like you learn to dance by dancing in a mirror, you can learn to write by listening to your own writing. Which is why conducting this writing test using the modern tools for writing makes total sense. I also would point out, as Cornelia and Ebony both talked about, that attention to the user interface was important, and the power of the technology allows for many accommodations to be built into the tests instead of having to be something a separate effort. I'd also point out that, interestingly, data that was presented earlier on keystrokes, how much they use the backspace key, how many words, all of those kinds of things, that data was immediately available for insights and analysis and research. These kinds of insights are unavailable with print or would be very difficult and manual to produce. One interesting thing to remember is that options for text input are evolving, and we do need to make sure that we are always testing, communicating with text, and the writing ability, and not testing the facility with the input device. So currently there are keyboards in hardware, keyboards in software, there are voice input, stylus inputs, and we need much more research into what kinds of effects these different inputs have on fluency, flexibility, and accuracy, and the ability actually to express ideas in writing. We also need to ensure, as a final comment, that all students have access to devices and that their schools are wired so that they can, in fact, take advantage of modern tools and not be disadvantaged when it comes to the writing assessment or other assessments in the future. So this assessment represents modern learning environments, and kudos to the National Assessment Governing Board for leading the country with this online test. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Karen. We have a couple of questions from the audience I'd like for you to address. So can you tell us how states are addressing keyboarding skills prior to 4th grade? This question comes from Mary Lou at the Nebraska Educational Service Unit.
Right. I don't think that there's actually a standard way that states are addressing keyboarding skills. I'll say a few things about keyboarding. First, many of us as adults remember taking keyboarding classes or typing classes, and typing for me, keyboarding for hopefully many of you on the phone, and we had our attainment. Our goal was 40 words a minute. Everybody thought that 40 words a minute was what we need to attain. What's interesting when we think about writing with children, or typing with children, or keyboarding with children, the goal is really to be able to input text as quickly or as efficiently as you can with a pencil or pen. So that's kind of a baseline. And many of our students are much more fluent than that. But that number is somewhere around 10 words a minute, 10 or 11 words a minute. So that's one of the things that we can remember. I also think keyboarding even in our youngest students, first and second graders, it's going to be very personalized. Some students will come to school having already able to input text faster with a keyboard than they can with a pencil or pen. So it needs to be personalized. We need to make sure that each student has access so that they can advance their own skills with input, text input, as much as possible.
Thank you. Michael Hawk of the Vermont Agency of Education is asking if tablets with the option of entering information via stylus have an advantage over standard computers that only permit entry by keyboard or mouse. You did make reference to this, and I don't know if you have any additional information to add to this question.
We don't have actual research, but I think in general it is interesting that people can generally input text faster with a device than they can with a pen. So it's sort of intuitive to think that someone could input text faster with a stylus, but again, it's probably different person to person. But I think that currently sort of a keyboard for actually inputting letters is probably more efficient. But I would also say that we need much more research. We need more research dollars. We need more research to go into the differences between the different kinds of input devices and how it affects fluency and flexibility and accuracy.
All right, and moving forward, I know that as NAEP is moving into computer-based testing and looking for that by 2017, hopefully our effort will produce a little bit more research on this level that we can share with the public in addition to the report that we're releasing today. So thank you, ladies, for your insight on this important topic. But we'd now like to open the floor for some additional questions that have been submitted by our webinar audience. My co-facilitator for this segment will be Valerie Mirapodi. She will direct the audience questions to one of our speakers, but all of you can comment this. In addition to the panelists, Ebony is available to respond to questions about of the implementation of this work. So, Valerie, I'll turn it to you.
Thank you so much, Cornelia. We do hope to pose as many questions as possible during the time we have today, and we'll be combining questions on similar topics. Questions that are not answered during today's webinar will be answered later via email. We have a question from following up on Cornelia's questions to Karen. This is from Molly Farrow. She's a curriculum development within the SAS curriculum pathways. She's wondering, really, how early do students begin school-based keyboard writing? And Elise or Shannon, could you kind of take and provide your thoughts on this question?
Sure. Shannon, what happens in your particular school? Let's start there.
You know, it's interesting. I was reflecting on this last night, and I don't think that there's, you know, directed instructions for teachers on what grade level you should begin keyboarding. I know even our preschoolers are on the computers, but they're not learning yet like true keyboarding skills. I would say by second grade, you know, they're playing the fun keyboarding games that are teaching them the correct finger positions and things like that. So probably about second grade.
And I think what Shannon says I've seen elsewhere around the country, that as we move to second and third grade, more explicit instruction in keyboarding skills happens. But I think probably many of us have seen, maybe with our own young people or our own children, that the availability of a whole range of tablet devices especially that preschoolers interact with glee often, that allow them to begin to understand the keyboard as it shows up on the tablet screen, or to play themselves with a game that might teach them some keyboarding, hunt and peck with little hands, that sort of thing, I think means that more and more young people are coming to school with a kind of concept of how keyboarding works to enter text. So the incoming readiness and conceptual ability to think about keyboard skills is probably more available to young people than ever before, even through those devices like tablets that don't only require keyboarding as a way to enter text. So I think we're going to see a dramatic change in the next few years about this very issue.
I'd also just add one other thing, and that is that sort of a rule of thumb for kids who are not already facile with keyboards is about 10 minutes a day for 6 weeks in elementary school does the trick. It gets them fluent enough so that they can write effectively with a computer. And then, as Shannon pointed out, the rest should be really integrated into the writing process, and they'll get better and better as they're actually writing real things for their classroom.
Terrific. I think that you started to address my next question, but I do want to pose it as a follow-up, just to see, are there any practical tips or strategies to really help students and support them by using computers, more specifically the use of mobile devices, to really help them start communicating effectively, especially in these early stages? Could you follow up with any other tips or strategies that you've seen in addition to what you've already said?
I would say, as a teacher, you know, when you're moving into writing on these devices, that it doesn't have to be, you know, it can be a gradual transition. It doesn't have to be, as a teacher, you know, okay, now we're only writing on the computer. You know, my students do a lot of different project type things, and we'll do, you know, a paragraph here, and they'll do that. I also think that we need to still focus on using the writing process, because, you know, a lot of people think when you sit down and you write on the computer that you're just going to write and you're going to print it and that's it. And, you know, still teaching kids, you know, the writing process of pre-writing and drafting and all those things are going to be really important. And then mini lessons on the tools that are available. I do a lot of shared writing with my students where we're actually writing on a computer on a large screen where they can actually see and contribute to the writing, but they can see the process as it's going on. So those are a couple tips that I would offer.
I think those are great tips, and one of the things that Shannon's tips point to, I think, is that for all of us, the big picture of learning to write is not the picture of learning to write with any particular device. It's the picture of learning to write itself, to be able to understand an audience, to think about the choices you make relative to a purpose, to understand exactly, as Shannon said, the writing process that writing doesn't come out full-formed the first time, and that we draft and we redraft and we take response. I think there's also a lot to be learned by any writer about forms and patterns and ways that that we communicate for particular purposes, that the way we talk when we're, or write when we're doing something like an op-ed and we're providing some sort of claim and evidence structure is different than when we're enchanting everybody with a wonderful story. And we need to be flexible, rhetorically flexible, to be able to do both those kinds of things. And we can work up a lot of those skills in language in general, transfer them to writing, and then learn that writing is a lot about that. And so using the devices are really tools to be able to do those larger purposes. So we don't want to take our eye off, I think, the big game of learning to write as we have this proliferation of tools, many of which just allow us to do those things more effectively. If we think about something like the writing process, for any of us, I'm a person old enough to remember what it was like to do even simple revision before word processing, a very early technology, made it so much easier to do revision than it was, in a more paper-based environment. And mobile devices allow us to mix voice and text pretty easily when we're composing. So the big game is still the big game, and I'd emphasize that.
I would agree, and the tools can just go to the background because they are coming at us quickly. If we even think about tools for collaborative writing with, say, Google Docs or something like that, that's also something that's interesting. And I think the other input device that we just need to keep in mind is voice. I have a colleague who broke her wrist, and so she has taken to inputting all of her current writing, at least the first draft, by voice. And then she just has to edit and fix the places where the computer may have made a mistake. So I think that there are so many tools coming at us. We just need to sort of keep, as Elise said, focused on communicating effectively with writing.
Thank you so much. Great discussion. Our next question is for Ebony at NCES. This is from Emily Richmond. She's with the Education Writers Association. And she was wondering about the study in the findings. Are you able to tell anything about student performance by ethnicity or socioeconomic status? Is there any indication that one group of students were more confident with their keyboarding skills than others? Ebony, how could you respond to that question?
Yes, just to begin with, this is a reminder that the data presented in this website are from our pilot assessment. So these data were not weighted to do a proper evaluation of students, how students compared to one group versus another. There are some preliminary information, though, by students' race, ethnicity. That information could be found in the technical memo that could be sent out to users if they would like to access that information. But also, there will be another analysis that gets into these pilot findings that will be released later on. We're hoping by the end of this year. So currently, we do not present information by race, ethnicity, or any other subgroup information at this time. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Definitely. I wanted to clarify that point, so thank you for doing that. Our next question is along the digital divide, continuing that conversation from Robin Fuchsa with the Oklahoma State University. She's wondering, knowing the systemic inequities between schools, how will issues of equity and access to technology be addressed for children with socioeconomic challenges, most often having the most limited access at school as well? Karen, would you like to provide an insight to that question?
Sure. I mean, I think the way that it's addressed is by ensuring that every single school in the country has high-speed access and devices for students. I think it's as simple as that's not a simple thing to do, but that is the answer. In order to provide equity across the country, we have to make sure that every student has access. It is modern learning environment requires it, and we need to get there. The FCC has been working on the wireless inside the school access and also the connection to the schools. and we need to make sure that we follow with devices for students, much as we followed with textbooks in the past.
Valerie, this is Cornelia. I'd just like to remind our listeners that when we asked students did they have access to a computer at the school, 100% said yes. To me, that was a very reassuring piece of information because while the results aren't broken out by all these demographics, the sample was completely representative of the entire country and all socioeconomic groups.
Great point, Cornelia.
I'm thinking I want to build a moment on Karen's great remarks. I think what she said is exactly right. We have to ensure access for everyone. And these access figures that came in the reports are promising. I'd ask us to think about a couple of things. One is whether young people simply have access to a computer. Yes, there's one here in the room. Yes, there's a computer lab. Are they able, though, to actually access that computer or those devices for the most sophisticated purposes? It could be that in some environments the computers are there, but they're really providing information for young people, or they're used primarily for assessment opportunities or some other kind of use of the computer that don't really allow young people to actually experience them as productive environments. I think that's something that we have to learn more about. Whether the new digital divide, let's say, might be less about whether the machinery is there and more about whether you are allowed to use these devices or supported to learn to use these devices for the richest purposes. That might be the new divide to look at. And a lot of that, as Karen pointed out, really is going to relate also to things like bandwidth, the kinds of purposes to which we can put these tools will relate to the larger infrastructure. So I think that's really an important question. And one of the things in the framework that the Framework Committee really thought about, because NAEP is an assessment that does not tie scores to an individual student for student high-stakes purposes. It allows us to, in effect, take the temperature on something nationally, provide a set of data from which we can make some decisions. And we were hoping that by doing this assessment in this environment and linking it with those equity questions, that without penalizing individual students or schools because of the access they have, we'd be able to say, okay, in general, this is what we know about fourth graders. This actually tells us something as a country about what we might do or invest in order to equalize, if necessary, the kind of access we need. So that status of NAEP as not a high-stakes individual assessment, but a broad look at what young people know and are able to do around a particular topic is a really important function for NAEP, and one that we should honor and preserve, I think.
I would agree with both of you and just go one step further and say that the access is very important, the ratio of computers to students, but also teacher training and making sure that teachers know how to effectively use the technology that they have and make sure that it really is integrated into the classroom and that students are using it on a daily basis for meaningful purposes.
Great points. Thank you so much to all of our panelists for contributing to that question. I think quite a few of our webinar participants today are wondering about the impact of this study for their states and how they look at their state assessments. Cornelia, do you have any insight or advice to states as they ponder this and they look at today's results?
I think that what they can learn about this is the importance of the platform. Actually, this was highlighted pretty early on in our discussion today, that the original platform that was presented was revised to be more user-friendly for fourth graders. So one of the big questions that comes to my mind is, are the computer platforms that states are implementing customizable for earlier grades? And so I think that that's a key takeaway, that states can begin asking those questions. And I think we will eventually have to answer the questions, are they equally accessible across platform types, tablets, desktops, as we move into an era when we're going to have multiple devices in the classroom. and not just one type of device.
Great. Any thoughts additionally from our panelists?
The only other thing I would say is that I think that this study leads the way as we talk about computer-based assessments, and the National Assessment Governing Board is a powerful body that can that does set sets policy and is doing incredibly important work. I think it was kudos for starting with 8th and 11th grade and or 12th grade and testing out the interface, making adjustments, thinking through accommodations, I mean, all of those kinds of things, ensuring that students actually had the tools. It wasn't just a text input space. Those are all things that I think can and should influence the testing that happens state to state as well.
Terrific. Thank you so much. So Cornelia, I think our last question of the day, I'm going to point to you as well. You mentioned talking about the goal of having computerized-based testing by 2017. And Kimberly Tenner, the assistant principal at Manchester Elementary Middle School, is wondering how will this pan out? Will computers continue to be used in the future, even as soon as the 2015 assessment?
Well, we're in the process of transitioning our assessments to computers. So right now, we administered an assessment in 2014 that was the Technology and Engineering Literacy Assessment at grade 8, and that was all computer-based. In 2015, we will be doing some pilot work. I mentioned trying to study moving from paper and pencil tests to computer-based tests. That work will be going on in 2015 and 2016, and then we will begin administering assessments in 2017, all on the computer. So 2017 is scheduled for reading, math, and writing. So that would mean that in addition to writing, we would have reading and mathematics administered on the computer. So, and then moving beyond that, all of the NAEP assessments would be transitioned into a computer-based platform. So yes, we're in that mode.
Terrific. Thank you. Cornelia, I think that's all the time that we have for questions today. Do you want to go ahead and close out the webinar?
I would. I really want to thank all of you who've been on the webinar with us today. You've raised some very interesting questions for our panelists to respond to, and we also appreciate our panelists very much for being here and adding their insights, because I think you see that each of the three brought very different insights about this, so it was great to have their collective wisdom. I hope that today's event is going to inspire all of you who are on the line to learn more about this report and continue this conversation at your state and local level. I would just encourage you to visit the Nation's Report Card website that you can see on the screen, and there are several other websites there that you can see, and you can find the other additional materials. You should also stay up to date on events. You can do that by following the governing board using hashtag NAEP. We also have a Facebook and a Twitter account, as you can see on the screen. And if there are any journalists on the call today that have any additional questions, you should feel free to contact our public affairs specialist, Stefan Harris. The last thing I would do in closing is to especially thank Shannon, Elise, Karen, and Ebony for their role today, and all of you for participating.
Thank you very much, Cornelia, and again to everybody who participated today. Ladies and gentlemen, this does conclude today's webinar. Have a wonderful day, and you may now disconnect.